opportunity. I know that there are at least one person who has wanted to talk about one of the action items for tomorrow. And so to make sure that we get all, if there are other things too around the action items tomorrow, we get those queued up now, so we're not scrambling tomorrow to kind of figure out where everybody's at and if we're making any changes. All right, Julia, thank you for part 2 of the legislative update.
Yes, it's good to spread things out a bit, right? So good afternoon, members. We're on the home stretch here. House Bill 2214 was introduced at the end of regular session and received a hearing in the House Appropriations Committee on April 21st. The bill addresses the assessment requirements for students to earn a Certificate of Academic Achievement, or CAA. The alternatives that students have access to if they don't meet standards on the assessment, and the high school and beyond plan. As Chair Munoz-Colon mentioned, the memo begins on page 77. There is also a chart on page 79 that compares the transition from the current assessment system to the Smarter Balanced Assessment, or SBAC, as it is in current law, which is the top table, and as it is proposed in House Bill 2214. House Bill 2214 would speed up the transition process and make the SBAC count for graduation for the class of 2016, which is this year's juniors, or they're juniors for about another month, I think. Rather than under current law, which would make the SBAC count for graduation for the class of 2019, which is our current 8th graders. Students would be required to achieve a score that places them in a level 3 or 4 on the SBAC in House Bill 2214 in both English Language Arts and Math in order to earn their CAA. For the class of 2016, if a student has already met standard on the 10th grade assessments, he or she may use those for their CAA. Excuse me, I'm having an allergy attack. Under current law, the primary way to earn the CAA is on the 10th grade assessments. But beginning with the class of 2016, the SBAC score of a student may be used if the student has not met standard yet on the 10th grade assessments. And the score they would have to achieve on the SBAC under current law is the score that the state board would set at that second threshold score. The substitute of 2214, which was heard on April 21st, would eliminate the requirement that the SBE set that second threshold score. So another way to think about this is that under current law, for the class of 2016 and beyond, the SBAC could be seen as an alternative to meeting standard on the 10th grade assessments. And under House Bill 2214, the 10th grade assessments would be the alternative to scoring a 3 or 4 on the SBAC, but that would only be for the class of 2016. And for the class of 2017 onward, you would have to meet level 3 or 4 on your SBAC. House Bill 2214 would also eliminate the biology end of course exam as a graduation requirement and establish a plan for transitioning to a comprehensive science assessment that is aligned with the next generation science standards. The substitute also includes an emergency clause, so this goes into effect for the class of 2015, which is this year's seniors. House Bill 2214 also changes the alternatives that students have access to if they don't meet standard on the state assessments. It would eliminate all objective alternative assessments. And those are things like the SAT, the ACT, the AP, and the IB exams. It would also eliminate grade comparisons and the collection of evidence. Students that do not score at a level 3 or 4 on the SBAC would be required to take a locally determined course in the content area that they didn't score a 3 or 4 in. And that course would have to be something that's deemed rigorous by the local school district. Rigor in House Bill 2214 is defined as the next course in the sequence after the course in which the student most recently earned a grade of C or higher. So for example, in math, if a student most recently earned a grade of C or higher in Algebra 1, the locally determined rigorous course may be geometry, depending on how they are sequencing the math courses. With the elimination of the language on alternative assessments, House Bill 2214 eliminates the previous definition of comparable rigor as the skills and knowledge of the student must demonstrate on the statewide student assessment. Once transition courses are available, districts are supposed to prioritize enrolling students into those transition courses as the locally determined course. House Bill 2214 also adds definition to the high school and beyond plan. It uses the language of House Bill 1591, and this was language that requires a high school and beyond plan to include educational goals, career goals, a 4-year course plan, identification of assessments necessary for graduation and for their next post-secondary step, and it was amended to include a resume or work log of some sort. So at the April 21st hearing, the board testified as other on House Bill 2214. There are some components that align with the state board's legislative priorities, and then there are others that have given the board some concern, or some pause rather. So first, the inclusion of a definition of a high school and beyond plan and those components align with the state board's legislative priority to further define the high school and beyond plan and make it a meaningful tool for students. The elimination of the biology end of course exam and making it effective for this class of graduating seniors this year in 2015 is something that the board supports and aligns with our priorities. And then also the formal incorporation of transition courses into the assessment landscape is something that aligns with the board's work and priorities. The things that have given us concern, first is the switching of graduation requirements and the alternatives that students have access to for current cohorts that are just getting ready to graduate, that are already in this 9 through 12 pipeline. So by the time that this bill passes, the class of 2016 will be entering in September and their graduation requirements will have changed when they show up for school in September. Also jumping to a level 3 or 4 right away versus having a transition period is a concern, and it's something I think that you heard in the forum yesterday, that concern about those higher standards for kids and what impact that's going to have. Also the elimination of all of the alternatives, the exams and the grade point average comparisons. The board's position has been to expand alternatives rather than eliminate alternatives, and we would like to see things included like dual credit versus getting rid of the objective alternatives. There's also concern about comparable rigor and the elimination of that definition of rigor, and whether the classes that would fit this new definition of the next class in the sequence after a student is earned a C, whether that provides students with the same opportunity to meet the standards that are required on the assessments, since the definition is no longer related to the skills and knowledge that are necessary to meet standard on the assessment. So with that, there are also some implementation concerns with the locally determined course, particularly for English language arts. Students are already required to take 4 years of English, so with that 4th year English course, their senior year course count as that locally determined course. They take an extra English course, and things along those lines, some more minor concerns. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions, or I'm sure there will be a robust discussion as well.
Any just initial technical questions for Julia? So just to start this conversation, I just wanted to, I do have one.
I understand that the bill is originally drafted, and I'm not sure it's still in there, I guess if that's the question, is it sets up 2 classifications of a diploma, an honors diploma, which would include the levels 3 and 4, and something else. Is that still in the bill?
So in the substitute, and I'm gonna look to Jack, I believe it is still in the bill, and it's, I think the original version, it was marked on the transcript, and then the substitute, it's marked on the diploma, or I might have that reversed, but it will still be indicated.
Can you speak into the mic?
So I haven't seen the substitute, and can somebody send it to us electronically, please? on the substitute, right?
Yes.
So this might not be, I just wanna make sure you guys know that when we say the substitute, it's probably the bill in your mind. It's been out for weeks. It's not something.
Because the bill hasn't been voted out of committee yet, right?
Right, yeah, and the substitute doesn't show up yet on the bill page, but if you go into the committee hearing materials, there is a substitute there, they just haven't fully updated it on the system, so that's why it's kind of exists in the ether.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So just to provide some context to it, you know, when I worked at OSPI, we often called these bills these multi-headed hydras because they sort of dealt with a similar topic, but they had a lot of tendrils or a lot of heads to this thing that some of which I think, like Julia said, clearly align with our guideposts. And when I say our guideposts, are legislative priorities, or if we've set a precedent on a position prior to that. I think the challenge with this bill is because it's a multi-headed hydra, there are some things that clearly are things that are aligned with our priorities, and then the things that we didn't imagine, you know, going into this session, that we're navigating and working with members to try to clarify both technical and some philosophical. And so I think our position is, you know, there are elements here that we really are stand behind because they're things that we had talked about fully during our discussion, but other items that are not quite aligned, or that we, because we're, you know, in the midst of session, still trying to figure out how they would play out in the lives of our students. I just want to remind you of the letter, so if you hadn't had a chance to read it, to make sure to take a look at the superintendent's letter. And so, do we want to, I felt like there was a lot of questions even in the executive committee about what was happening with the bill, and I suspected that there were similar questions amongst the members here, which is why I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to queue it up to have a conversation about the bill. And to know, you know, and you all know this probably as well as I do, we're going to be talking about something that will probably morph again. So, which is why we have guideposts and we are not kind of falling hard on certain things because we just don't know what it's going to look like in a few weeks. So, but it would be great if there were some questions or concerns.
I would just really appreciate going through the list of concerns that we've got again. Is it, I've seen it someplace, is it in our packet, or is it?
It was not included, the concerns in our testimony was not included in the memo. This is from Ben's testimony that was given in the video, and then he was cut off, so there are some things that weren't in his testimony that were in discussion, so.
Can we go through them
Yes,
again, please?
so first is switching the requirements, the graduation requirements and the alternatives for existing cohorts of students, particularly the class of 2016, and the jumping straight to level 3 or 4 in the transition to SBAC versus kind of ramping up to it with a lower threshold score.
Can we slow it down?
Oh, sorry. I've been going too fast.
Okay.
Yeah, no. It's the end of the day for us, Julia. We're trying to, I know.
So we're eliminating, under the current legislation, we are required to set
A second cut score.
a second cut score, and this would eliminate that?
It would eliminate that, yep. And so students would be required immediately to score at a level 3 or 4. Also, the elimination of the alternatives to the assessment versus expanding alternatives. This gets rid of all alternatives and replaces them with the locally determined course. And the change in definition for comparable rigor, so it's no longer tied back to the skills and knowledge that would be necessary to meet standard on the assessment, and instead is tied to a student's grade in their course sequencing.
Julia, can you briefly go over in the substitute, the carve-out language for the class of 2016, you know, the change?
Right, so in the original bill, math was carved out as if you had already met standard on your math EOC, then you could use that to earn your CAA instead of the SBEC. And in the substitute, they added in meeting standard on your 10th grade reading and writing HISP. So essentially, if you already met standard on the state assessments, on your 10th grade state assessments, you could use those instead of having to score a 3 or 4 in SBEC. But after the class of 2016, that goes away. So the class of 2017, or this year's sophomores, would have to score a level 3 or 4 on their SBEC.
So if they'd already taken,
Take
as
it
if
and
I'm a
pass, yeah.
sophomore, if I had already taken that as an option, I would still then.
That would still count
So
for
it's
you.
like null
Yeah.
and void that what I
Yes,
had just done.
but if you hadn't already met standard, you would have to meet a level 3 or 4 in your SBAC. And if you didn't do that, or if you didn't meet that standard, you won't have access to those other alternatives either. You would then immediately go into that locally determined course.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it doesn't hold them harmless, essentially. Kevin?
I just want to be clear on this. I understand the conflict here, but is it specific in the law where it says, or is it just two statutes potentially, or two bills competing with one another, I guess two laws, that says we will no longer be in that position of a threshold, setting a second threshold score, or is it just by, you're just saying inherent in what this law says, that's what's going to play out?
So in the original bill, it was not explicit. In the substitute bill, it is explicit, and it
Okay.
takes that language